Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be reading you some true ghost stories from Haunted Canada book. I will be reading 4 different stories, and they're all based in Canada. The Ghost Trapper, Eastern Labrador, Newfoundland, and Labrador. It's said that some ghostly spirits are doomed to wander the earth forever, unable to find peace after death because of the terrible things they did while they were alive. That notion is often put forward to explain the haunting appearances of the Ghost Trapper of Labrador, also known as Smoker. The mysterious trapper is usually identified as Isaiah Dillingham, a Newfoundlander who moved to mainland Labrador in the early 1900s. He'd come in search for better hunting grounds, but after running his new trap lines for a year or so, Dillingham decided there had to be an easier way to make a living. He became a bootlegger and cooked up his illegal alcohol in a backwoods still. Then he peddled it around to willing and eager buyers. It was disgusting tasting stuff, nicknamed smoke by the locals, who started calling its maker Smoker. It was also a potent brew, so much that it was often poisonous. More than a few men went crazy drinking that stuff. For some, it was lethal. Eventually, the RCMP caught up with Smoker, but he didn't change his ways. After spending a year in jail in St. John's, he went right back to running a still and selling his illegal booze. But he was better at it this time. He rounded up a team of snow white dogs, painted his wooden sled white, and made himself a parka and pants from white furs and skins. The camouflage worked. As Dillingham roamed the coast of Labrador selling his deadly drink, he blended in perfectly with the snowy drifts and blizzard-driven whiteouts. The police couldn't catch him, and the money rolled in, but a lot of good it did him. Smoker had taken to drinking his own smoke. As the madness crept in, Smoker lost control. One version of the story has him arrested in 1920 for murdering a customer, and then falling in his jail cell and breaking his back. Another version has him staggering around on a fish drying rack, or flake, and breaking his back in a fall from the flake. Either way, a fall killed him, but just before he died, his head filling with searing visions of hellish torment, he prayed to be spared eternal punishment. He prayed for the chance to keep driving his dog team after death so he could make up for all the bad things he had done. After Smoker's death, a few people reported hearing the sounds of a dog team being urged on by its driver. When they looked outside, they saw nothing, and there were no sled or dog tracks in the snow. Others reported seeing a mysterious sledder dressed in white racing across the snow-covered landscape. Both types of appearances seemed to occur just before a severe storm blew in. Was it Smoker's ghost, trying to warn people to take shelter from an approaching blizzard? Some people thought so. There are other stories of the ghostly trapper doing good deeds. One involves a lost hunter who was guided to safety during a blustery storm by a large man dressed all in white. Another involves 2 RCMP officers on patrol in Labrador in 1949. Supposedly the Mounties lost in a blizzard were dangerously close to freezing to death. With barely enough strength left to urge on their husky dogs, the men despaired of ever making it back to headquarters. Suddenly another man appeared in the distance. He was dressed all in white, and he was driving a team of 14 white dogs pulling a white sled. The Mounties decided to follow him. 2 agonizing hours later, almost blinded by snow and ready to drop with exhaustion, the Mounties came upon a cabin where some trappers had taken shelter from the storm. They staggered inside, assuming their rescuer had done the same, because they had lost sight of him outdoors. But he wasn't there, and the trappers told them he never would be. They told the Mounties they had been saved by Smoker, a murderer whom other lawmen had brought to justice nearly 30 years earlier. Was that dramatic rescue one more example of the Ghost Trapper of Labrador, keeping his deathbed promise to do good in the afterlife? Maybe, but there are problems with the Ghost Trapper story. For one thing, the Newfoundland Rangers patrolled Labrador from 1935 to 1950. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police didn't assume law enforcement duties in Newfoundland and Labrador until 1950, a year after Newfoundland joined Confederation. Moreover, before 1935, no one force was responsible for policing most of Labrador. It seems highly unlikely that members of the Newfoundland would have crossed the Strait of Belle Isle to choose a bootlegger all over the mainland during winter storms and drag him back to a St. John's jail. And if Smoker had murdered someone, wouldn't there be an official record of that crime? You would think so. So what part, if any, of the ghost trapper story is fact? It's hard to say. What does seem to be true is that every now and then, someone caught a glimpse of a mysterious figure dressed in white, driving a team of white dogs that pulled a white wooden sled, and any unexplained events that happened next have only fed the legend of the ghostly bootlegger who seeks redemption. The Rebel Spirit, Toronto, Ontario. William Lyon Mackenzie was a crusading newspaper editor and publisher, a fiery provincial politician, Toronto's first mayor and leader of the rebellion in 1837 in Upper Canada, now Ontario. That's an impressive list of accomplishments, and one that would probably have brought most people not only fame but fortune too. But Mackenzie was an honest man. He never took bribes, and he never accepted government money for jobs he didn't do. All his life he fought that sort of corruption, and all his life he struggled to make ends meet. After the government crushed the rebellion, Mackenzie had to escape to the United States to avoid imprisonment, or worse still, a date with the gallows. During the next 12 years in exile, he tried to make enough money to care for his family by writing, taking odd jobs, and publishing a few small newspapers. In 1849, when he was pardoned and allowed to return to Canada, he came back to Toronto. Mackenzie went right back to attacking government corruption as both a newspaper publisher and an elected politician. However, he wasn't nearly as popular as he had been in the 1830s, and over the years he found it harder and harder to survive, both politically and financially. In 1858, tired, in poor health, and in debt, he resigned from the Legislative Assembly of Upper Canada. Faithful friends who hadn't forgotten how hard he had fought for just cause raised enough money to provide him and his family with a furnished house. Mackenzie died there 3 years later in 1861. The house at 82 Bond Street was rescued from the Wreckers' Ball in 1936 and was gradually restored to look as it did when Mackenzie lived in it. It's now a museum with many of his belongings on display. There's even a printing press like the one he used set up in the basement. It's still in working condition, but back in 1960, Mr. and Mrs. Alex Dobin, live-in caretakers at the house, had every reason to wish it weren't. Every now and then, when they were alone in the place, they would hear the press rumbling away in the basement. They also heard footsteps pacing around the house and the piano playing all on its own. The Dobins moved out after only a few months of this, and from then on the building's caretakers lived inside of the house. But the incidents that made the Dobins nervous were minor compared to what had happened to the caretaking couple that came before them. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Edmonds lived in a third-floor apartment of Mackenzie's house from 1956 to 1960. It was only 4 years, but for Miss Edmonds, her time there was almost more than she could bear. She learned to put up with the mysterious footsteps and wasn't too frightened by the rumbling noises in the basement and the rocking chair that moved back and forth as if there were someone in it. But she found the apparitions to be very disturbing. Several times she caught sight of a long-haired woman in an old-fashioned dress wandering the halls. Occasionally she encountered a short, bald man wearing a 19th century style jacket. Her description of the man was eerily similar to Mackenzie's appearance, except for his baldness. But the rebel leader's famed red hair was actually the product of a skilled wig maker. Mackenzie had turned to wigs after he lost most of his hair, but maybe he felt comfortable enough at home to leave his wig on the dressing table, and his spirit felt the same way. But it was a second long-haired woman who truly terrified Miss Edmonds. The first time she appeared, Miss Edmonds was in bed. She'd been asleep for a couple of hours when a touch on her shoulder woke her up. She looked up to find a woman looming above her. The woman appeared to be standing between the wall and the headboard, a space too narrow for any human being to fit. Her long brown hair dangled down near Miss Edmonds' pillow. Then suddenly the woman disappeared. The ghostly apparition stayed away for a year, but then she reappeared. She did so in most dramatic fashions. Once again she woke up Miss Edmonds, hovering over her from above the headboard. But this time, before she faded away, she reached down and hit Miss Edmonds in the face. Mr. Edmonds comforted his hysterical wife and coaxed her back to sleep by saying she just had a bad dream. But Miss Edmonds knew better. When she woke up the next morning, one side of her face was sore, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw why. Her eye was red with broken blood vessels, and a dark bruise was forming around it. After the Dobbins moved out in 1960, a minister performed a religious service to drive the otherworldly spirits from the house. After the haunting incident seemed to stop, some people said reports of ghostly visitations had been invented to attract visitors to the historical museum. But no one could convince Miss Edmonds that what had happened to her had just been a publicity stunt. Her black eye was all the proof she needed that something spooky and strange had been going on at Mackenzie House. Something she very relieved to be done with when she and her husband moved out. Things That Go Bump in the Night, based in Genesee Lake, Saskatchewan. Nestled on the southeastern edge of Moose Mountain Provincial Park, Genesee Lake is a popular summer resort with impressive scenery, good fishing, and great campsites. And for those who are looking for some otherworldly entertainment, it's also said to have a haunted nightclub. For more than 10 years now, folks have been talking about the spooky things that happen at the Moosehead Inn, a former dance hall that was once a favorite hangout for teenagers. In 1990, Estevan resident Dale Orsted bought the inn and decided to fix it up a little, but he'd only had the place a few months when he started noticing that things like ashtrays, cutlery, glasses, and figurines were disappearing at an unusual rate. At first, Orsted thought a few customers or staff members might be suffering from a bad case of sticky fingers. But the missing items started showing up again, often in the weirdest places. Then the loud noises started, banging on the locked front door, thumping on the floors overhead. The racket could last for hours. Frustrated and frightened, Orsted called the police, but they couldn't figure out who or what was causing it. In 1992, things went from bad to worse. One night after the last customers had left, Orsted had a friend begin ripping up some smelly old carpeting. Almost immediately, the noise started up again, this time louder than ever. Sounds of large metal objects crashing into each other were so loud they nearly shattered the window panes. The ear-splitting, nerve-jarring, clanging and banging went on all week, night after night, until all the new carpeting was installed. Until then, Orsted had laughed whenever anyone suggested this place might be haunted. After the narrowing week, he found himself, against his better judgment, agreeing with them. The presence of a ghost would also explain other things that started happening at the Moosehead. The lights flickered several times at night, the dishwasher turned itself on and off, a pail flew across the dance floor, and locked security doors suddenly crashed open and slammed shut. Patrons were excited to be around when some of these things happened, but they were a little nervous too. So was Orsted. He'd been living at the inn since he bought it, but for 2 years in the mid-1990s, he moved back to Estevan, commuting to work each day just so he could get a break from all the stress he felt at Genesee Lake. As word about the Moosehead's troubles spread, Canadian-American TV crews showed up to film the story of the haunted inn, and investigative reporters wrote about the creepy incidents experienced at Orsted, his girlfriend, his buddies, and the servers working there. A psychic who read about the haunting phoned Orsted and told him his renovations to the place had probably upset the original owner, Archibald Grandison. She said that the old gentleman's spirit was most likely the source of the mournful morning sound Orsted had started hearing outside his bedroom door. Finally, Orsted decided to take an if you can't beat 'em, join 'em approach to his weird predicament. He came up with the idea of hosting a psychic fair in the inn. Several people interested in ghosts and the paranormal showed up for the fair, which turned out to be quite an entertaining event for the whole town. During the fair, Orsted took part in a special gathering seance organized by a psychic who said she detected 3 separate ghosts in the inn. She claimed she was able to convince 2 of them, a cleaning woman, a teenage boy who had drowned, to leave, but a third, an older man who may have been Archibald Grandison, seemed determined to stay around until he was certain his widow was being well cared for. Miss Grandison was Orsted's next-door neighbor. He liked the elderly lady and was already keeping a friendly eye of her, so he didn't mind at all making more of an effort to look after her. As soon as he started doing that, the number of spooky incidents decreased dramatically. In 1999, when Miss Grandison died, the ghost and Orsted finally found peace. Fiery Phantom Ship, Northumberland Strait, Prince Edward Island. You've just spent a perfectly wonderful day on one of the Prince Edward Island's sun-drenched beaches, just along the Northumberland Strait. You're packing up a picnic basket when you see it, a large ship, sails billowing It appears out of nowhere and seems to be sailing dangerously close to shore. You stare in amazement as you realize it's on fire. Then as quickly as it appeared, it's gone. If this happened to you, you would join the ranks of hundreds, maybe even thousands of others who have spotted a mysterious three-masted schooner sailing the waters of the southern shores of PEI. Your sighting would be a bit unusual because most appearances occur in the autumn, not in the summer, and often just before a stormy northeast wind blows in, not at the end of a warm, sunny day. But ever since the 1970s, the Phantom ship has sailed into view in the spring, summer, winter, and fall, in good and bad weather alike. At times, the schooner has even sailed right into Charlottetown Harbor, in clear view of scores of people working on the docks. Once, about 100 years ago, several dock hands jumped into a dinghy and fiercely rowed out to rescue the sailors they could see fighting the fires on deck. But just as they were about to reach the burning schooner, it was swallowed up in a murky mist. When the mist cleared just minutes later, no trace of the ship or its crew could be found. It's easy enough to write off one person's story of the ship as the work of an overactive imagination, but reports from groups of witnesses, such as those would-be rescuers in the harbor, are much harder to ignore. 50 years later, a carload of teenagers spotted the ship in Victoria Harbor. They saw the crew moving around on deck and climbing up and down the rigging. They also saw the fires burning, but they watched long enough to note that the flames never consumed the ship. And in the early 1960s, people on a crowded beach were amazed when the burning schooner appeared late one afternoon. No one story. A pirate ship sunk off the coast, a vessel loaded with immigrants lost in a storm, a ship weighed down with lumber that disappeared without a trace, satisfies people's efforts to explain the presence of the ship in the area. But together with the eerie sounds of cannon fire or sea guns that are often heard in the distance, the appearance of the Phantom ship in the Northumberland Strait can still send shivers up the spines of many islanders. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.